So this is my copy of Jane Eyre I'm using, and it's the Wordsworth Classic copy, so any page numbers that I mention, they'll be from this copy, but it's all chapter 1, so any other version of the book you have should be quite similar. So this is just my copy and how I've annotated it, so I tend to use post-it notes and just colour in any keywords. So on the first page I've highlighted quotes such as "cloud so sombre, heart saddened, firesides with her darlings around her, folds of scarlet drapery, the drear November day, and a pale blank of mist and cloud." So I thought this was quite a significant use of pathetic fallacy to sort of reflect Jane's feelings, and the weather's very cold and forbidding, and it reflects this coldness and loneliness of Jane's world, and Brontë juxtaposes the outside scene with the warm, friendly scene from which Jane's excluded, so where Mrs. Reed has her darlings around her. And the view from the window seat reflects Jane's own misery and is obscured by mist, and this could metaphorically suggest that she can't see beyond her own unhappiness, and that her future is also obscured. However, just as the mist outside will lift, so her future will emerge more clearly, and Bronte's opened the story at a point where her life is about to change. So until this point, Jane's been unhappy, but there's been no dramatic focus to interest readers, so Jane's ambiguous social standing sets up most of the novel's internal tension and conflict, and Jane's struggle against male oppression begins with John Reed, which we see also in this chapter. So, because it's the opening chapter, I think it sets up two of the primary themes in the novel of class conflict and gender difference, because Jane's social class is quite ambiguous, because although she lives very luxuriously, she's not considered one of the family. And I thought there's an early reference to the idea of passion and fiery, juxtaposing the ice. So here we have the folds of scarlet drapery and the pale blank of mist and cloud. So we see a lot of this visual contrast throughout the novel. It's quite characteristic, such as when Jane compares Rochester and St John, and the scarlet curtains also linked to the red room, so there's a similar imagery created from the start. But however, scarlet sounds much softer. However, the curtains do cover her like she's trapped in the red room, but here it's her choice. But all of the words have very passionate connotations, contrasting the outside weather. British birds, solitary rocks and promontories, forlorn regions of dreary space, shadowy like all the half-comprehended notions that float dim through children's brains, solitary churchyard, phantoms, the fiend pinning down the thief's back behind him, terror, black-horned things seated aloof on a rock surveying a distant crowd surrounding a gallows, an undeveloped understanding and imperfect feelings. So I think the choice of the book is very significant because, like a bird, Jane longs to fly free from the alienation she experiences in the Reed household. So solitary for the birds, it represents how Jane is living, and it discloses her state of mind because the book is full of sublime images of shipwreck, storms, deaths and discovery. So I think especially in the period of the Romantic era, and from her great maturity, the adult Jane guides the reader to be aware of limited perceptions of the child. So as young Jane looks at the pictures of the birds, she tells us they acted as stimulus for her imagination, but she reflects that it was shadowy, and Brontë establishes them as formative influences on Jane's undeveloped feelings. So Jane finds refuge in the inner world of her imagination, interpreting the stories told in the book. In one picture, she sees the ships as phantoms, and other such imagery gives a sense of foreboding and foreshadows the events to come, introducing elements of the Gothic era. Brontë draws on the isolation, the association with death, the workings of the supernatural, as well as the presence of some undefined evil in other contexts throughout the novel as well. So this is going from the bottom of page 6 to the top of page 7, where chapter 1 ends. So I've highlighted things like, "For they are mine, all their house belongs to me, or it will do in a few years." So I thought that shows the way that Jane doesn't own the book, so symbolically suggesting that even though a girl may understand what is being written conventionally, the boys will always be the heir. And then there's the repeated use of similes where she says, you're like a murderer, you're like a slave driver, you're like the Roman emperors, which I thought was an emphasis on the corruption inherent in the class systems, which, like, as we see, will be a theme throughout. And then she says, he ran headlong at me, a tyrant, and he called me rat. So the inferior position is made clear here through her fight with John. Written authority is backed up in this case by physical and verbal violence. Property ownership is manifestly masculine. John rules by might and right. John's introduction foreshadows his end that we see later on in the novel.